carry on. Yeah.
Okay. So thanks for your time, Mick. It's a shame you can't make the whole convention, but you've agreed to do a brief video chat with us. So I'm going to ask you a few questions. Starting, when did you first make contact with Iris, and how old were you both at the time?
Well, my first contact with Iris really was through the Origami Portfolio Society. a lot had gone on in the 60s, where a few people around the UK were working sort of independently. I say a few, probably no more than about 15. But one by one, they had sort of managed to contact either Lillian Oppenheimer in the Origami Centre in New York to try and find out whether there were any other people in the UK, or they got in touch with Alfred Bestel because of Rupert, or they got in touch with Robert Harbin somehow. But the whole thing came together when Sidney French decided to start the Origami Portfolio Society. I know there's going to be a few folks in the audience there who won't have a clue what I'm talking about. We're talking now 1965, and how do you get a group of people together when there's only about 15 of them and they're spaced all the way around the country? And Sydney's solution was very simple. We would start off with a box. You'd add something to the box, you'd pass it on to the next person, and around it went, and finally it came around to you. You took something out, look at everybody else's models, and sent it on again. And Iris was one of the people who was on the list. Actually, I wouldn't go so far as to say that there would not be an Origami Society without Iris Walker, but she provided a significant number of addresses to Sidney French because of her correspondence with Lillian Oppenheimer and other origami people around the world. So it was her idea really to start a society, but she didn't know what to do. She didn't know how to do it. And Sidney came along, and he was the logistic man. He was the organizer. So off we went. And the thing about Iris was that because she'd been in touch with a number of people, she got an awful lot of material to share. A lot of us had got no material to share whatsoever. So it was always a bit of a panic when the portfolio came to think, what on earth are we going to do about this? Because we all felt responsible to actually contribute something. But Iris's contribution was significant at that time. And then, of course, because we hit it off, everybody seemed to hit it off together, we decided to meet, and that happened in 1966 in Kensington, London, at the home of Rosalie Evernine, who was Lillian Oppenheimer's daughter. And Lillian came to visit her and said, come on, let's have an origami meeting. So that was meeting number one. I guess you can imagine how excited we were about that.
And it's probably also worth pointing out to some of our younger listeners that back in those days, there was no computers, there was no email. You had to write and use Royal Mail basically to contact each other. So everything would be done presumably over 2 or 3 month period. How long did it take for the portfolio to come back to you?
It was probably about 3 or 4 months. Some people were quicker than others. It was enough for us to Sydney to put a second one in, so that went round as well. But the notebook is a very significant part of that portfolio. I think you've got a copy of that, and I think you'll put that on display, where we were all encouraged to write a little bit about ourselves. Now, Iris, in her entry, she lived in Hull. She was married to Arthur, and they had a son who was 8. I would put her around about 32, 33 years of age. far away from the same age as David Lister and John Smith, who all lived up in that area at one time.
You would have been a teenager, presumably.
Pardon?
Being a teenager, would you?
I was I was the first portfolio. I was 18. Yeah.
So when the portfolio arrived, presumably it was full of models. Did people include diagrams, or were you tempted to try and reverse engineer them, or just guess?
Well, there were very few people, it seemed at that time in the origami world, who were capable of doing diagrams. So a lot of the stuff that came in had got a few sketches and things, but most of the time we survived on step folds. So you folded the first step and then put a number 1 on it, did your valley fold, inked it in, and then did number 2, and you did 3, 4, 5 all the way through. That was one way of doing it. Now, there were some diagrams that Iris actually put in, which had come from America. There was Alice Gray and Jessie Sato, who were very good drafts people. And so we were able to enjoy those as well. That was one of the things that was necessary in the beginning of the society, that we needed diagrams. And that was one of my major contributions at that time. To John Smith had this wonderful idea to diagram everything, and and the more I gave him, the more came back.
I think it's the diagrams that you and Dave Venables did really set a huge, really high benchmark for the rest of the origami world.
Well, the idea of that, it's again, photocopying was an issue in those years. The Xerox machine hadn't long been invented, so that wasn't really available. And I was a trainee engineer and was learning to be a draftsman, although I'd always done a lot of that at school. Interestingly, Yoshizawa was a draftsman before he became a paper folder. What was the question?
It was just about how impressive the big leap in diagram standards that you and Dave then set up.
That's very kind of you, but we did have some the work of Ranlit, Gene Ranlit in particular, and others in America, and Robert Harbin, of course, at least gave us a good start. There were all the notations and things like that. Funny, I came across something interesting recently. This is going off to tangent, but somebody asked me to make a pheasant, and I knew there was one in Ranlit's Best of Origami. And I remember the last time I made it, I'd found it difficult. And so I wasn't particularly looking forward to it. But anyway, when I actually came and did it this month, I realised why it was difficult. And that's because Sam and Gene Ranlit hadn't put many construction lines on the diagrams. I'd never realised that before. Of course, construction lines can clutter up. One of the problems with diagrams is you can put too much information on. And if you put all these construction lines on that aren't necessarily important at that time, they've already served their purpose. But there are some where, if you imagine doing a 60-degree fold and you hadn't got that construction line in, you wouldn't understand that that's what you had to do. And that's the way that it worked. But the work of Harbin and the Ranlits gave us a very good start. And I was so grateful to Dave Venables when he said, well, I can do some of this as well. And he did probably more than I did.
So when I first came to a convention, Iris was clearly one of the first people you spoke to, because she made a point of seeking out anyone she didn't recognise and going over and saying hello. How important do you think this was?
Tremendous. We all know what it's like to go to our first convention. everybody goes with a bit of trepidation. Am I going to be able to do this? She was always there. She was always there with tips as well. And she spent an awful lot of time WI groups, any group in the whole area that she could actually get to, she would go and visit. And we discussed this a lot, Dave Venables, Ray and myself, is that why did we go out to all these groups and things, hoping that we would get another member to join us, and that very rarely happened. But I said, really, our aim should be to actually teach the country what origami is all about, because they don't know. They know what a paper dart is and one or two other things perhaps, but they don't realise, as we're starting to realise, what there is, what a world there is out there of paper folding. And so our aim was that at least if we can get actually people to understand what the word origami meant, they've actually done it, hopefully they've enjoyed it, then things might start to happen. And things have happened, haven't they, in 50 years on.
In her archives, she kept almost every piece of correspondence that she's involved with, and there'll be two or three letters from the whole Townswomen's Guild. Can you come along? And then there'll be 4 or 5 afterwards from people who've been to the meeting, saying how much they enjoyed it and can they learn more about origami. And she would write to them, telling them about the society, and she was incredibly diligent in keeping these communication threads alive.
A wonderful encourager, wonderful. Everybody loved her, and she was there to help out. But technically, she was very competent as well. In those early days, see, Neil Elias did some diagrams, but they were for his own use, and they weren't particularly well detailed, and so usually we had to re-engineer, start from the end and work backwards, and which is okay, but it's difficult enough sometimes to do 3D moves going forward. To work out what the 3D move is going backwards is another thing. But she was very good at that, very, very, very good indeed. And there was very few things that we could actually throw at her that she wouldn't be able to come up with a solution to.
Yeah, I think personally, I think her creative work has never really received the proper recognition, because she was doing 3D designs and all kinds of unusual concepts in the mid-60s, and people think it's good old Iris, but I don't think they're quite aware of what a gifted creator she was.
Yeah, and I suppose the BOS has got something to hold its hand up for that, because we could have put a booklet of Iris's work out, couldn't we? Generally, that's the way that people get to know people's work. There's a little book or something together. The odd model that comes up in the magazine or whatever is fine, but if you can get a collection of models all together and you can see that there is some sort of let's see, what's the word I'm trying to whatever, there is something about the techniques and things that she's using or he's using that is worth a further look. People's work doesn't get publicised very much. And
she was the last person really to push herself in any way, because when I found out about her car, I said, "Can you teach me?" And she said, "Yeah, of course." Yeah. And I was telling her how great I thought it was, and she, "Oh yes, it's all right, it's all right." And then I found out she'd done a chain, which these days, you know, we all know how to make an origami chain, but in the 60s, she was the first to do it. She had a cannon, she had a helicopter. The only published one I can remember was the ball in a ball in one of the Harbin books. There must have been so many others that she probably never showed people.
Yeah, or they were on display once, perhaps. And it is a shame. It is a shame, but that doesn't mean to say we can't actually do something about that.
Yep, indeed we can. Talking of which, her origami archive, which people will be able to see a small fraction of at the convention, I've been working through it, and it's utterly staggering how important it is. There's letters from every famous or infamous name you can think of. They were in correspondence. There's a letter from Neil Elias, which was written on paper with a letterhead from the railway company that he was working for. He borrowed some paper from work, and there's an unpublished model from Jack Skillman that was sent to her. And I'm personally not sure exactly how we're going to approach it, because for me, we should scan every single document and put them in a catalogue, because Origami USA features quite heavily in her correspondence. Lillian Oppenheimer, Alice Gray, Jessie Cito, people like this. So I'm sure they'd like to, to see these documents. So what I'm hoping is that we can agree part of the library's duties is to catalogue this digitally, but it's a vast amount of work.
Well, I'm sure you're right. The thing about history is this: unless somebody loves it and is prepared to do something about it, it dies. It's a sad thing. I was the unofficial historian of the company that I worked for, and we managed to put a few things out. We celebrated 100 years, so that enabled us to put some hard copy publication out that would be in libraries forever and a day, public libraries, that is. But when I left, and I thought I'd left it in good hands, and then the company actually went down the tube probably about 10, 15 years afterwards, and all the history went with it. Nobody was interested to take it on. The parent company wasn't interested in taking it on. And that's very, very sad. And it could happen to us.
I think it
because
could
happen to us
as well, because most of these names I've kind of learned. I've always had an interest in the development of the society, but there's is it Brian Bishop? Somebody Bishop, and I remember the name, but I know there's several letters from him, and clearly he was keen and involved. And in 20 years' time, there'll be nobody around really who can say who these people were and what their part in the story was. So I think we need to work at this urgently, personally.
Yeah, I think the little booklet of the portfolio thing would have talked about Brian Bishop. Actually, he was using origami. May as well tidy this up. He was using origami as a tool for Esperanto, which was his great love, and it's still his great love. If you put in Brian R. Bishop Esperanto, Esperanto is a language which takes bits of everybody else's language, puts them all together, and there are a number of Esperanto speakers around the world, and he was hoping that origami might have something to do with that as well. But you're right. There's loads of people. You see, there's two guys, Tim Ward, Trevor Hatchett, brilliant people at Oxford University, and way beyond their time. In a way, they lost interest in it because origami at that point hadn't got to the point to feed their creative imaginations. It was the time where the jackstone came along. Remember, the jackstone is a cube with a pyramid on each side of the cube made from one square. And when I was talking to them down in London, they were interested in a cube on a cube on a cube on a cube. All from one square, and they'd more or less got there, but there was nobody really to fire their imagination in the ways that they wanted to, so they went on to other things.
Yeah, I think it's really natural. So in closing, what, in your opinion, was special about Iris?
Iris was one of the first people to put her hand up and say, I will help with this. Right at the start, we realised that we needed a method of communication. We were all dotted around this country. You couldn't rely on the portfolio when it only came round every 3 or 4 months. To get news, you needed something. And we had the Origami Monthly for a bit. That was a monthly, just text, just saying what was going on, any items of news, meetings, things like that. Sadly, Iris, not long after after BOS was formed in '67, she lost her husband, and of course she was left with bringing up her son, who'd got some learning difficulties as well. And so in a way, we fortunately Ray Bolt came along to help her with the duplication of that, and then he took over the magazine itself and then took it further on, and that allowed really Iris to do what she was really good at, and that was to communicate with people, and just encourage them.
Yeah.
She was the in a way a bit like Max. If you got a problem with something, you went to Max and he would sort it out, and Iris was one of those.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks so much, Mick. I hope we'll see you at a future convention, you and your dear wife.
Well, I hope so. Can I say one more thing?
You can.
When I was able to come to conventions and things like that, I always used to give a little challenge, right? So here is a straightforward water bomb. Water bomb? Windmill, right? Nothing wonderful about that, okay? But it's all one colour, okay? So here's one which has got 4 colours, okay? And you think, well, how's that done there? Until you find out that I've cheated and actually built the colours onto the paper and did the usual thing. So the question is, how easy, right? And there must be many different ways of doing it. How easy is it to make a 4-colour windmill like that, right? Obviously, there's 4 pieces in here. So that seems to be all right. It's got to be locked, of course. You can't have all floppy stuff. And so if you're playing around at the bar tonight and you think, oh, let's have a look at Mick's challenge for this convention. There you go.
Okay. Thank you again. Cheerio.
Okay. Thanks for having me. Bye. Have a lovely time.